Hey guys, Mochi here, and we're back with Havencraft Altersphere Take 2 Draft Infographic. Similar to the Rune one, I'm going to start with a certain card, but I'm actually going to start with a certain subset of cards in the Haven pool because they're probably the most critical in the Haven draft. And I'm sure people guessed by now that it's the Lion cards. Temple of the Holy Lion, Peace Weaver, Prism Swing, and Holy Lion Crystal. So what are these cards all about? So these cards all revolve around generating this card, the Holy Land Crystal. You can get it as a token spell or just draft it as a regular spell. You get 3 lions at the beginning, which are the 2/2 Conjure Golem versions. And then you get 3 lions that are the silver version, which are just 4/4. It doesn't matter how you get them, like 4 play point, 4/4s. It doesn't matter how you get them, but they'll be sort of Dread Dragon stats. And then when you have 6 or more and you play another one, there'll be 6 play point, 4/4 storms. So what's important about this card is 2 things. One, it sort of rewards you for playing multiples of them. Like the higher density of Lion Crystal cards you have in your draft, the more you can play them out. And then it also has the tacked on benefit of Enhance 5, where you can recycle the Holy Lion Crystal. For 5 play points, you throw it down and then you add it back into your hand. So that way you can get sort of infinite value or eventually build up to your 4/4 storms tokens and win the game off that. So I'll start things off with the Holy Lion Temple. So a lot of people consider this to be the best Holy Lion card, and even like the best silver or best card in Havencraft. I'd actually disagree a lot with that. So the reasoning behind this is the sort of plan people have against you when playing against Havencraft. Like everyone's gonna play sort of aggressive in fear of just losing out to lions in the grindy infinite value game. Like, there's almost no craft that would sort of just sit there and play the long game with you, other than maybe like Portal and Rune, which can do stuff unfair to you in the mid to late game and sort of value out in that sense. But otherwise, everyone's going to just sort of play on board and try to win that way. And Temple of the Holy Lion is very bad in the most important turns for Havencraft to succeed. And that's turn 2 to like turn 7 or 8. Like, in those turns, if you're playing against Haven and they play a Temple of Holy Lion, I don't want you to think like, oh wow, they're just gonna high roll me. It's very much possible. Like they could have like 3 Lion Crystals in hand and have like some in the deck or something crazy like that. But for the most part, what they did is they played an investigation. What they did is they drew just a Conjure Golem. I'm just gonna put it in that perspective for a second. And then they wasted 2 play points. So in the early game turns, you're up on 2 play points, and then they played a do nothing amulet, and then you can snowball a game in that sense. So just because it has like that infinite value perspective, like, oh, they can get the discount on it. So like turn 9, turn 10, like the turn 9 combo, they can get 2 of these to cycle for free, and then turn 10, they can play 3 a turn. So like that's the main combo. But that's only for Haven in the sort of late game sense. Like, Haven has to get to the late game first, which is sort of a struggle, and I'll explain why with a couple of these cards and what you can do to sort of stop a snowball from happening. So Peace Weaver, it doesn't really belong here in the sense, but it's just a vanilla line generator. So 3 play points, you get the 3/4, and then it just draws a card. So it's vanilla on board, but you get the defensive ward, and then you get the draw. It's not anti-tempo, you just drop it down, free draw, great card. Prism Swing, just like this card, which I'll explain when I go through it in the natural order. It's definitely the best silver card Haven can draft. These cards they don't look like it, but they're just as strong as something like a Blood Knuckle Bodyguard, because they can just come down on 5. Like, they disguise themselves as 2 and 3 drops, but ideally you're playing them as 5 drops. You throw them down and you do removal and you play a body, and then you can choose to evo or not from there. And just because, again, people are pressuring you because they're scared of lions, like these give you so much safety because they can evo and ram into, like, this can evo and ram into Goliaths, and this can evo and ram into like even like 4/3s. And then they like trade like amazing because you can just kill the post evo follower and just deal with like their 2 to 3 drop. So just Holy Lion Crystal, a lot of people would just force them, just say like, oh, I have to draft as many as possible. I don't sort of like that mentality, just saying, oh, Haven can only win by just drafting a billion Lion Crystals, because you're still relying on sort of like, not a high roll, but like a high rolly draft draw order. Like, drafting like 4 will be quite difficult in all your runs, and then you still have to like draw 3 of them on your curve. Like, a rule of thumb I like to have is the first 2 Lion Crystals have to come down as vanilla Conjure Golems. You can't afford to cycle them. If you're cycling in them, you're already up like a ton on value. Like you're already winning the game in a sense because of maybe some other cards you played. But this isn't the reason you're winning if you're cycling these early, or like maybe you get like a late game temple as like a top deck, and then you can start cycling them, and you like run out of other things on board interaction to do. But otherwise, like your first 2 Lion Crystals should definitely come down and be cycled as Conjure Golems. Then you have to work for getting to the plate lines. Once you get to the plate lines, it's like a bit easier because they're 5, like you can play 5 play points, and then you get like a 4/4. That's like reasonable. But you still have to get the second line out of the way. You have to drop it down safely, and then you have to recycle the Lion Crystal if you only have like 3. And I'm talking in a sense of like having like 15 to 20 draws. Like it's sort of like pushed in the later game now, like the take 2 turns, but you still have to like draw like a lot of these Lion Crystal / generators into your early draws. So like they're not as broken as a lot of people would think, but they definitely are strong, and they have a ton of potential scaling up with your draft. But I don't consider them like the be-all end-all of sort of a Haven draft. I sort of like botched over like a bunch of key stuff. Maybe I'll like write a bit about it after. Like there's a bunch of stuff I sort of still want to say, but in the interest of time, I'll just go over it in a natural order now. So City of Gold. This card's like pretty cool. It's like that Chandelabra. It discounts a bunch of stuff. It made a whole unlimited deck viable. So what's the problem with this card in Take 2? Well, first of all, you sort of have like a low count of sort of value amulets that you're playing. Like the power of this card in like Constructed is just you have like a bunch of low cost amulets that you can sort of discount, and some you can even like drop down, get like free value off of like the death sentence kind of cards. But these ones you sort of have just like Beastly Vow. Like Sanctuary is not like super unfair. Like sure, you would get like instant draw from Tome. Like the discount from this is like whatever, and like some other random things in the pool or that might be in the pool in the future. But a couple of things that are a problem with this card is first that it takes up all like golden legendary slot, which you'd rather have for other stuff, but that's like minor, or like maybe you have more. But like second of all, you can also just draw this card. If you draw this card naturally, it's a cheaper Chandelabra, but like it's still really bad. Like this card, you have to have like other synergies to sort of line up with it. Like it's do nothing until you have additional help, and that additional help isn't even really worth a card. And you have to have like a high density amulet deck to sort of make it work, and even there, it's not really that good. So same thing as Technical Shrine. Like, you know, some people can like be crazy and just draft like this, and then draw them as all like one-ofs. But healing in the sort of Haven pool, like, yes, it's like restore, like ally, so it's not like just conditional on face. But you have to have like a lot of random healings, which is like sort of inconsistent. You have to drop this as a do nothing, and then you have to have all your heals sort of in hand and not rotting in your deck. So a lot of things sort of just make this card bad, and you can't really get away with like a 5 play point do nothing in the format. So Garuda, same thing with like a lot of these win conditions. Like you have to sort of like leverage like how good they are in sort of the general sense. And a lot of your amulets, like the problem with them is these ones are popping. Like you're trying to have these cards in your hand and like on the board to like pop in the mid to late game. And when you reach this point, you might actually have nothing on the board to sort of get the fanfare off. Like to get maybe like an explosive board or to get a bunch of face damage on the opponent. And like the Accelerate one is like basically nothing. Like you don't want to waste a card on that, even though you might have like maybe an explosive board with like a Beastly Vow pop or something. So like he doesn't do his like damage reliably, and you can't really make some crazy boards with it most of the time. Like maybe sometimes you can get like 2 Sanctuaries in like 7/8 or something and then pop them, but like otherwise it's like not too great. So Marduk, as a joke, like, oh, maybe it's the best in Havencraft because you can like play in 1 billion amulets and then do all your chip damage there. But same problem. You have a bunch of amulets that are still trying to come down as early as possible, get their value, get their cooldowns off, and a bunch of stuff. So you won't like be holding them into your hand. And same thing like spells, they're going to be used a lot in the mid to early game. Anti-followers, like sort of not too bad, but it's still nothing you want to use. So you want to take a pass on Marduk if you definitely can. So Petra. So this is like your I wrote him as her as a 2-drop, but she's actually a 1-drop goblin. But she has a neat like unattackable clause. Like you can actually do some very cool stuff with her. Like I'm actually a very huge fan of like playing Haven like aggressively, not for like, you know, competitive wise, but like for fun and to like experiment, because it's like a very not underrated, but sort of like an untouched portion of like Haven, which you could definitely can do some stuff with like Sanctum Keepers, like Disciple of Repose, doing like a bunch of chip damage, and then like you can like hide something post devote, or you can hide something that's already stormed in, and you can do some really cool stuff with it. But again, it's a goblin, like you have better stuff to draft in a value sense, so definitely don't pick it up if you're just playing control or something. So Radiance, this card's actually insane in a sense, where like a cool application you can do with it is just have some sort of follow or pop off an amulet, you evo, and they're snowballing you just because you played like one of these amulets on like turn 2, 3, something like that. And then what you do is you evo into their big thing, and then they're throwing a bunch of small stuff on board or something, and then since you evoed into maybe like a 3/4, you get to heal it for 4, or if you're lucky, like some other things get healed, and then you AoE the board, and that works from there. The problem with this card is just turns like 4 to 8, where this card's best, it might actually not be live. Like in the late game, you're just throwing, both players are just sort of throwing followers on board. Your opponents aren't gonna like take bad trades on you. They're gonna try to trade as efficiently as possible while pushing board. And same with you, like it's very hard to sort of get off in the mid game turns. Like you might actually be like neutral for the most part, and this is sort of dead in hand. And this ends up being dead in hand a lot of the time, even though it has like an AoE sort of effect going for it. So False God, I was very critical in my invisible list of this of Havencraft in the past of this card. So it's got sort of the same problem with Garuda, and it's actually a lot worse now without like Turtle. Like the things you pull, like you want to pull like maybe a Sanctuary or a Vow, same thing, or in like a Moray, I guess. But the same thing, you're drawing these cards in the early game. Like this is turn 9 at the very least, and then you've already like drawn some of these, played some of these. You might even have like follows on board, but like that's not too big of a deal. But the fact that these are sort of out of your deck, and you don't want to draft like a critical mass of just amulets, unless you're like going super amulet synergy heavy, which is very hard to do and possibly ill-advised. So like sometimes like this Fanfare like does basically nothing. But like even like a sort of average case, if this pulls like a Vow or pulls some of this, it's like even decent. So that's why it sort of got the bump. Even though it's, I don't consider it like sort of like, you know, the Nephthys kind of like wing condition in Haven. So Omen of One, this card's actually very good in Haven. It's just again same thing, conditional stuff, just draft reliant. But you know, if you can get it off, you can get it off, and it'll be very good if you can get your drafts to line up in that sense. But still, I wouldn't like first pick him. So Jeweled Priestess, she's like just vanilla, not vanilla, but you know, understated, gives you the draw, gives you the heal damage. For the most part, you just pick the draw if you're playing defensive. Maybe the heal, you need it when you're like really low on life, or maybe you're trying to finish your opponent off in like 1 or 2 damage, or 1 or 2 turns over like some storm damage like that. But she's like decent value wise. Like sometimes you can just get snowballed from playing 1/2, but hopefully you can just play it maybe on a turn, like the Evo turns, or like an off turn in the late game, and it's like okay. So White Fang, this card's actually like sort of weird in a sense, because like it's like the dragon card. The dragon card was never really like amazing. It was sort of like around here. And this card, without like the heal doesn't really matter, in a sense, because its countdown to only is sort of like halved. And getting another heal is pretty unreliable. Playing it down on turn 3 can be a death sentence in and of itself. So for that reason, it's like sort of around here. Like maybe if you have like a bunch of heals, you can sort of bump it up. Or like you're trying to like draft some crazy Tenko Shrine deck. But otherwise it like floats around here as like a Holy Wing Dragon spawn. So Godsworn Alexo, this card's very cool. Like, you know, it got the buff from like 8 play points. But the problem with this card is 5/5 ward that's like sort of understated. It's like almost reasonable enough. But this amulet reduction, like the amulet you might not even have all the time. Like things can pop if you don't have like permanent stuff on board. And then just 4 damage reduction, it doesn't matter. If you're getting snowballed, you're going to lose the game from there. And then if you're just taking like 8 damage converted to 4, like sure, it might save you on every once in a while, but for the most part, you're just losing a game from there, and it's not like saving you from too much. So Fighter, same thing, you know, your vanilla plus, you can just treat it higher if you have like spells. It's funny because like, you know, it was used in sort of the Holy Lion deck, where you use it for like the spells or the amulets and they get a bunch of benefits. Maybe you can sometimes cheese people out with this. But like again, it's like sort of like that reasonable thing you can like sort of hop around. So Moon and Sun, again, I consider Haven to be a highly pressured craft. So it can't really deal, or it can't really afford to just go for infinite value. Like the Amaterasu is actually pretty nice, just for like heal, like not heal synergy, but just extending your turns, just getting heal. Like the difference between like 12 and 14 life is maybe like 2 turns or 1 turn. So that might defer your opponent from like all inning you in the late game or something. So like it's like reasonable in that sense, but it's sort of weak in Haven in my opinion. Like you have maybe you have lines to do. Maybe you have like a late game win condition to get to. This one doesn't help you in the value game. So Hind, this card's cool for the super amulet focused decks. You can get the rush heal if you have nothing better to reduce, or you can get the Bane reduce everything on board. I got some like crazy stuff in the Grand Prix. It was like ridiculous, but unfortunately we don't have like too many things to like get a super combo off of, because like these ones sort of pop off early. But maybe you can get like some Sanctuary into like random stuff with the Bane body. And like it evos pretty well if you manage to get the Bane one. But even if you don't, like you can play the standalone one and then evo it, and then you get the free amulet from it. And for the most part, you're gonna have like something random to draw. So Phil, so she's like oh, I wrote 5 for her, unfortunately. But yeah, 6 play point 4/5. Nothing else is really wrong. So the ward and then the heals forever. So the things does a really good job of just extending the game. Again, same thing with heals, like 12 to 14 life. Like over the course of like 4 turns, 4 life, it can make a huge difference. And then like the healing on board just makes your opponent just trade with you more. They're already sort of trading with you, just managing your board while chipping at your face. And like the heal is sort of inconsequential, like past the evo turns, like to your followers at least. But it's definitely just a tacked on bonus. Like it's a freebie on a basically vanilla statted follower. It's only like sort of down here just because you have a lot of value stuff you're aiming to take in the Haven slot, but it can sort of like bump up sort of with the next card. So this card is like the standalone win condition. It's pretty slow, but you can even win with it off like sort of hitting face like 2 times if the opponent's scared of the Seraph. But they shouldn't be really scared of the Seraph because it's like 4 turns. But maybe you can like control the board from there. Like it has the mini benefit of like actually proccing on purges, but like not if it's transformed for like random reasons like the Forest Whisperers or something. But it's like reasonable as like a vanilla fatty with like a win condition that's slow, but you can definitely make it work. So Gilneas, you might have like the benefit of having like amulet procs, and then it randomly gives those things extra attack. But for the most part, just ambush drain, that's like reasonable. Draw's reasonable, but it's not like too insane in Haven just because it's not like super aggressive. Maybe you can get like a tomb off it or something, but again, it's not like crazy. So this entire section for like the Havencraft cards, I've been having like sort of trouble with like moving around. I'm very happy with like this entire section. I think these are all in their right places, just like up and down. I'll talk about this one a bit more after. I still don't think it deserves the jump, but Lorena, it's the same thing with like the weirdness of being like a 2-drop. Where you keep it in an opening hand. It's not, I won't say it's not very good going first, but going first you're pressured to curve out quite a bit, so it might come down and not do its job properly. And then in the evo turns, it's like really tight knit. Like this one can evo like pretty well still, even in the late game turns. But sort of like an inconsistency thing. Like it can go up and down. I feel like this is a good spot for it, but you can definitely justify it higher, especially if you're missing on some other evo pings. So this card, like these 2 cards, I'm actually very confident about their placements because it's symmetrical, right? Symmetrical effects are generally like risky. It doesn't matter that it's like overstated, this can help, but like just giving your opponent free stuff, like this is a heal and then draw, like opponent's heal 1, draw, if I recall that correctly. And then just letting your opponent just get more deeper into their deck, deeper into their power cards. It's something you generally want to avoid, because this can like lose you the game out of nowhere, even though it seems sort of helpful. It's got the bonus like evo point heal recovery as a bonus. So same thing with this card. It has like a symmetrical effect. You might like ramp a Dragoncraft. You might give Sword like their turn 6 play or something randomly, and then like draw is good. But you can get some Havencraft things to pop, some random things going for it. It's got the awkwardness of Catalina, like evoing, but like it's still really big. It still has like the pseudo protection, and like this effect, you can definitely make good use of it. But I feel like this is a really good spot for it. Just above statted, but like somewhat symmetrical and possibly detrimental effect. So this card is sort of got a downgrade. Like it was here before. I sort of kicked it down for like Lena or something. Because this thing still like dies to puppets, tokens. The crafts that sort of like like to bully Haven, this they can sort of like ram tokens into this or ram something after. Like you don't want to like fully trade, like evolve it like an 8/6, kill something, and then it ends up a 6/1. Like that's not strong. You want it to be like a 6/2 or 6/3, and you hope your opponent can't deal with it like in a good way. But some crafts can deal with it in a good way, so it's like sort of inconsistent being like a giant value engine, but it's still like a good like last word follower, and sometimes it can end up being very potent. So Purge was another thing I was jumping up and down. So because with the draft changes, you can like just, I won't say reliably, but you can like end up with 1 or 2 purges in your deck. And then but I was thinking about it, like all Haven decks, like I don't want to be in the scope where all Haven decks are just like control or just stalling mid-range decks. Like you can definitely like finish off the game with stuff. And like Purge isn't really helpful in the decks that aren't like lion finishers or like win condition finishers. Because in those sort of decks, like you're just letting your opponent reset on board again. They get the board again, and then they can just trade with everything if you don't have like a potent finisher to close out the game. So like again, it can sort of jump up and down. Definitely if you're like playing that defensive win condition or have a bunch of lions sort of draft, you can value Purge much higher. So Apostle. So this card gets the boon of just being, you know, a 1/4 Bane after. Like it's very reliable in that sense. Unfortunately, you have to evolve it, and it's funny, oh, it dodged Pitfall in the past. But, you know, it just acted as, like, sort of a tribunal, well, targeted tribunal, like, target something, kill it. That's, like, very reliable. Kill the biggest thing on board, and then this is annoying as just a 1/4 that just sort of sits there. It threatens to do it again, and, you know, the opponent has to blow removal on it, and then carry on. And if they don't, they have to, like, evolve, like, a 2-drop into it, and that's, like, super inefficient for them. But they definitely have to remove it, so it's, like, a very high priority threat. So that Holy Lion is like really interesting because it's like super vanilla, 4/7 spawn this, but like that's crazy, ridiculous overstead. Like if you play this on 4, like unless they have like a ping evo or like, you know, removal, like premium removal into like something, it's like very hard to clear. And it's like a freebie, like Floral Fencer, +1 line count. The ironic thing is in the late game, it sort of struggles to get the lion, like 2/5 ward. I won't say it's underwhelming, like it's just above average, which is like perfectly reasonable, like when you want to play defensive. And then you can accelerate out the lion if you like get it under 4 play points if you really want the lion for the infinite value game. So like it's really strong in that sense. Like there's basically no opportunity cost to just take it as a 4-drop. You evo it and then you get a bunch of stats on board, and then you can control the game from there, or just try to have like a split board tempo game. So Assault Priest, the Pitfall on evo. This thing is definitely, like, from my just, you know, gameplay experience, the best sort of Havencraft follower in this category, because this thing is like super safe. Like 5 play point, 6/6, like that's basically standard evo. Ward draw, like that's all completely great. And then it gets a Pitfall on evo, so you can evo, ram it in. It's like a 6/3, 6/2, whatever, and then it just kills whatever they post evoed. And like that's super safe on board. Like they have to clear this, they have to establish again, and then it just plays into like these sort of cards again. So like this gets you through your mid game like super consistently, and then it's at like the perfect play point. It's got no like enhance or whatever flexibility to like sort of like screw it over in your like, early draws. You just draw it and you play it. And even in the late game, like ward draw is like a very strong combination on like basically vanilla stats for a 5-drop. So this card got a sort of jump, even though it doesn't evo properly. Like some people avoid your followers just because they want to get the chip damage in, so you might be able to turn like a fighter into like a Goliath or something. And then the evo can like potentially be super strong. You can get like a bunch of like 1/1s on board if you're super lucky. But even just killing the strongest thing and then ramming in. Same thing with like these sort of applications where you kill the strongest thing and then you ram into like this can ram up to like 4 drops. So again, it makes your mid game super safe, and it's in the play point cost where you can always get your evos out. So Hector, as a joke, I had them like here. Oh, you know, he's not that strong, but that's not true. 9 shadows is like sometimes you don't get them on like 7 or 8, but like as long as you're curving out, like you get amulet or blind crystals act as 2. There are like random stuff that give you choose cards that act as 2. And like, you know, amulets popping, those count as 2. So you're gonna have like 9 shadows eventually, like turn 8, 9. You don't even have to like play him turn 7 as like a good card. You can just save him as sort of a late game swing card. He has the benefit of making like stuff pop like live. Like you can make a vow like pop out of an amulet or a sanctuary pop out, and then you can just rush those in. with like free value. Like 5/6 for 7 is nothing to slouch at either. It's like perfectly reasonable stats, even if you like somehow don't get the fanfare. And then you can still like get stuff on board. You can still like do the old school combo where you just throw down random drops alongside them and then you give them 2/2 rush or 2/0 rush. And like that's all super strong. Like he's definitely like a solid pick, especially for like the 7-drop slot. So Arbiter, same thing, you know, your Vis Summoner stats, your freebie, try to avoid the duds, get a bunch of value, just great on curve, and it's sort of like safety in a sense where you can just play a sort of big drop and the opponent has to contest it. Big drop along hopefully small sized or medium drops. So again, Proto Prince, you know, finally I've come to my senses and Prince is right here, but that's not true. These cards are the greatest in Havencraft because you want to play sort of a defensive late game plan. People are pressuring you out, so they play into Proto a lot. And then people sort of want to deny your line plan, and sometimes you don't have it. So just drafting a pure win condition in sort of a stally game plan where you don't really have a sort of way to win is a great thing for Haven. Alright, so let's go quickly into the silvers. So Feather Rush. This is definitely the worst card in Haven because it doesn't play into their defensive plan. Fun fact, I've actually lost to like a triple Sanctum Keeper Feather Rush deck. That thing was insane. You can like get some troll things going with it, which is sort of funny. But yeah, you're playing defensive a lot of the time, defensive mid-range value-wise, so this doesn't really help you. It's like overcosted. You have to like pay a lot just to like do something moderately okay, and it's not like too amazing. So Father Punishment. He doesn't gain stats, so like maybe you can get like a 4/1, you ping it off by ramming this into it, and then you can destroy something. Like maybe the amulet thing helps, but that's like very minor. But like destroying a follower, you get like execution on like the discount, but it costs an evo point, and for the most part, it's not really worth it. So Riposte, I was struggling to sort of like place it around here, but like I haven't seen it much, I haven't used it much. So it's like tentatively here as just sort of card draw, but it's inconsistent. Like you might be able to have a deck that definitely has like priority targets to fetch out, and you can definitely draft like decks that have like, you know, 8 to 10 2-drops, and then this ends up being consistent enough. But it's sort of like in the late game, like you're drawing this and then maybe you're playing that out. That's not like the strongest plays you can make. Sure, it might like strengthen your next draws, but again, you're not like drawing like the power cards out of your deck for the most part. I mean, maybe you can actually just get a lion draft and then end up with a bunch of these. But tentatively, like card draw just ends up here anyway, just because again, Haven's sort of defensive. Like you have a lot of value stuff going for you anyway. Where like, do you actually need pure card draw that like in the early and mid game it can just screw you over just because it's in your hand. So Riposte, I'm actually a big fan of this card just because it's just free chip damage. It can like do 3/5 over 2 turns. Like if the opponent, like if you go first and you want to get your chip damage in, like, you know, you can combo with Sanctum Keepers for like 5 damage in the late game. Like just free incremental chip damage is like super important just for when you just want to play a sort of fair game and just kill your opponent off damage and you don't have your lions. And even if you do have your lions, like 16, 12, those are the magic numbers for getting your lion totals down. And like just any free chip damage is perfectly welcome. But again, it's sort of like 2-drop, do nothing. You know, defensive drafts don't really care much for it, so that's why it's here. So Sophia, 3 play point, 2/3. It has the evo that, for the most part, just screws you over. This as a joke, this is sort of like a shadow mechanic where it just revives something that just died. It's very hard to sort of get off because when you're getting it off, maybe like a tiger pops or something, and then you hit into it. But like the problem is the tiger pops, so you have to like evo the tiger, and then you can't evo this. And when you evo this, like it doesn't gain full stats, so it might not trade that well. And then you have to bring back something like relatively big in order for this to be worth it. So it's like inconsistency combined with the non-vanilla evo that sort of like pushes it down here. Speaking of inconsistent, we got the Holy Gunner. So as a rule of thumb, just treat this as you can treat this as vanilla, but just treat it as the worst condition you can get. Like if you need the ping one, just pretend you get the monastic. Same thing, if you want the monastic, just treat it as a fighter. In both cases, like it's perfectly fine. Just a 2/2 with sort of upside that it obviously is random, but sometimes it can work out for you. You know, hopefully you get the monastic on like sack turns, or you get the deal one when you need it. But for the most part, it's just fine. Fine where it is just 2-drop with upside. So Lion Tempo, I'm not sure what I haven't really covered here, but same thing, like it's anti-tempo for the turns that you really care for, which is like 2 to 7. You can't really afford to like cycle early, and like later on, like if you're like 8 to 9 and you're stable board, you're winning in the sense that you're Havencraft and you've reached the late game safely. But otherwise, I consider it like super unsafe. Like the times I've seen like turn 2 to like 5 temple, I'm either getting like super high rolled, which is like super uncommon, or the opponent's just like throwing the game. Like I feel like you're throwing, if you throw out early temples, like you have to have like you have to just throw the crystal down to not fall behind on board. Otherwise, you're gonna like fall too far behind. The opponent's gonna snowball you, and then you'll lose from there. Unless you have like a lot of unfair like payoff or unfair removal to line up with it. So opposing statues, this card's like pretty nice. Just 2/3 interaction, storm on Evo, and then you can get the 6/5 on Evo, and then it heals a bit. And then as a free bonus, like if you're running out of cards, maybe you're going first, and then you're being aggressive for whatever reason, you can just sort of recycle it for infinite value. Even in the late game, sometimes that's, I won't say enough to win the game, but it's definitely a nice value piece to have. So the Inquisitor. So this card sort of competes with like the removal slot, but it's fine. Like you definitely want some removal. As a bonus, again, the bonus amulet thing doesn't matter. Execution on accelerate. You can definitely use it as that, but it's sort of clunky at multiples, but it definitely can work out. And in the late game, you can squeeze it out for additional value. Just 5/5 remove something. The arena format's sort of like fairer now. You see less of these, so you can definitely afford to just play this out and just play a tempo game from there, and it's very strong. So I'll just go over Peace Weaver first because I want to cover these after. So again, same thing, Peace Weaver, just your vanilla 3/2 split board. I failed to mention that. You can 5 play points, split board this 3/2, 2/2, and Evo the one flexibly, like Evo the 4/4, protect it. That's like very strong. And just Line Crystal +1 without going anti-tempo on board is something I value very highly. So again, these cards are, I'll tell you that they're the highest performing silvers in Haven from personal experience. Because they act as big knuckle bodyguards, or just your free pings on 5. You even have the flexibility of like you can panic use this on 3 or just drop this on 2. For the most part, the unicorn you're actually not going to take, which is funny. The expensive option versus the cheap option. The cheap option ends up being just safe for Haven because Haven really needs its removal. Because once you run out of sort of unfair things to do on your like Evo turns, you're playing a lot of vanilla stuff on board. So you definitely want like interaction. You don't want like delayed stuff in the late game. You need stuff that just interacts with the board now and just keeps you safe from dying. So these cards do their job really well, and they protect you super well in the mid game. Alright, so bronze picks now. So Realm of Repose. You can do some very cool things with it. Like the problem is like the non-attacking thing. Maybe you have like a bunch of random repose stuff out, and then you can like do something cool with it. The problem with it, like the 3 defense reduction thing, it doesn't really matter because again, if you're being snowballed, you're gonna lose the game anyway. But you can do some like random things where you establish a follower. A lot of people might not know this, but you can actually trade with things already on board and then sort of protect the other things. So maybe if I have something I play from hand and then I have something on board, I trade the things on board away, and then the thing from hand is protected with this unattackable. So you can like do some sort of cool things with it. But it's not like super reliable, and it's not very strong, and it's super weak in the early game. So Windbear. So this card's very cool because it draws you the Plea and the Vow. The problem with these cards is they fall off in the late game. It's the same thing with the Windbear. It's like 0/2. Like the good news with this card is that sort of balances out is just in the early game you can drop it down, sack turns. 0/2, so what? Like they still sort of have to Evo something. On turn 4, they might Evo into this, and then you can just drop down the Vow for like a freebie that's like similar to this card. And then like you can play Plea early just if you want the card draw. You can weave it in flexibly on curve. It's sort of like inflexible. Like you might even just have wanted just having Plea on turn 1. Like Plea might be pretty hard to play in the early game turns. Just sort of a nod to not using it and just using Vow because it curves out nicer. But either way, it's like sort of balances out somewhere around here. I don't particularly think it's like amazing. You definitely don't want more than one, but it's like a reasonable thing to take. So Sealed Tome. This card's very interesting because you can just use it as a delayed insight. For the most part, it doesn't really matter that it's delayed. You can just weave it in when you have like free play points floating from like removal turns or establishing a threat, and then that's fine. Teachings you sort of want to avoid unless you have like, I don't know, a ton of removal or like random amulets in hand. Because maybe you have like a purge going on, but teachings can like screw you over because for the most part a lot of drafts are follow heavier. So teachings you just pick, or sacred you take if you can't get the forbidden, and then you don't want to get the draw for some reason. Maybe you want to set up removal for the Falcon. This is like a 2/1 storm, so you can get some chip damage in that's pretty hard to interact with. or you can like set up removal turns going into that. So like all that's like pretty reasonable. And this is all in one play point commitment. Like you can just use it as insight. So it's like perfectly nice. You can even like bump it up once or like maybe even twice if you really value it that highly. So Hazen, this card's very cool. Just your standard 1/3. 1/3 is like a very bad in standard stats, but it makes up for it with like the above average fighter evo, which is like pretty relevant. You can just drop this and then drop one of the two pseudo banes, and then you can have a very good evo turn like that. Like the ward thing doesn't really matter. Like it's pretty bad. I mean, in the early game. In the late game, it can actually be very useful in the ward. But in the early game, it's sort of detrimental. It dies to like 3/2s, 3/3s. It can die to like 1/2 into like 2/2, something random like that. That's like not too common, but like 2/2 ping 1. All these random things just sort of kill it for free. That you definitely want to sort of have it in the evo turns if you can. But it's like sort of okay in that case. So Lycoin, his main problem is just the inconsistency. You have a 5 play point 5/4. You have another one here that's strictly better if you can't get this fanfare, and this fanfare is hard to get. Like again, these amulets are trying to come down in your early turns, so you're barely like saving them as is, and then if you manage to get the fanfare, it's not like super unfair. It's just really good, but it's mainly the inconsistent part that holds it back. So Angelic Idol, same thing, like inconsistency. You can definitely do some cool things with it. I sort of have it more like here, but it's like tentatively like jumping around because it can like screw you over. Like if you like play, I won't say aggressively, just playing on board, like you might want something to trade. Like this evo is super unreliable. Sometimes the non-vanilla evo stats can screw you over. It can attack on evo, just letting you guys know. I just forgot to put that. But yeah, just inconsistency, unable to attack, unable to interact with board. Sometimes it can just hurt you a lot. So Curate, just 7-drop. This 7-drop's just better at interacting with stuff. But sometimes this can help you just on 4 play points. That would be a crazy card. But yeah, it's 7 play points. But yeah, it just helps you stay alive on board. Sometimes it's enough. Sometimes you just want to play just a vanilla threat on board. And it ends up being pretty good in that respect. So you can sort of have it here, but it's not like amazing. So Beastly Vow, yep, your standard early game amulet that pops into follower. It's like it scales terribly into late game, so that's why it's sorted down. But you can definitely have some like early game power plays. You can play this and then have some removal set up or some premium stuff on your evos, and then have an explosive board and try to go for that. But again, if you can avoid it, maybe you want to just have a standard deck that sort of curves out and has like safe early games. So none. This card's pretty interesting. Like the Bane on the opponent turns just makes it sort of awkward. Sometimes you can have like a bunch of random stuff set up that just denies your opponent's evo turns, which is very cool. A very nice application for just Haven to have because it lets them stay really safe. But I just consider this card better just because it denies pressure better and it lets you trade. Like sure, it's not as aggressive. Sometimes that actually does matter. But again, this card's sort of like higher up in a general sense because I feel like your drafts are gonna be sort of defensive. They don't really care too much about the damage that the Nun can do. So Bashful, same thing. It has like some ambush things that go for it. Maybe you can play it as a 4/3 ambush. It doesn't trade very well when you enhance it for 5, but maybe you can get it on 2-drop. Maybe you can get the free heal after. You can evo it. It ends up being like sort of okay, sort of big for 5. So like you can treat it as a pseudo 5-drop, and it sometimes works. But for the most part, it's just a 3. You're sort of low on 3 drops to take if you don't get these ones, and here is like sort of empty if you're trying to draft the big stuff. So this sort of ends up higher if you sort of want a 3-drop and you don't get any from the upper picks. So you can definitely take it higher in that regard. It's like a respectable 3-drop, gets a bunch of freebies that end up being pretty good. And like just trading with 2-drops, healing can be super annoying for your opponent. So Sister. So this card ends up being super important just because it's a sack on turn 4. It's probably the best one. You know, we had previous ones in the past that summoned the Tiger and the Falcon, the 4/3 and the 2/3, the Tamer and the something Birdsong, I believe, or Sky Song. I forgot what it was called. But same thing. This card ends up being the same. 4 play point, 2/2. Get the Divine Birdsong. Just countdown 2 gives you interaction on board, storm damage to face, just a bunch of stuff. Like you don't want to throw out like a lot of these cards. So just having something to throw out turn 4 is perfectly reasonable. So same thing, I went over this with sort of the Nun. It's just sort of a better version for trading wise. It's not very good at dealing chip damage, but you'll take it when you take it. So Lion Crystal, you can respectfully just take as many as you want, like as long as it's beside just stuff that's above vanilla. But I definitely wouldn't like take this as a priority, like this and this versus like some of these premium options, especially if these are like the first ones that you get for these premium options, because you definitely need like the power in your own common slot. You can't just afford to like mass draft these all the time. Sometimes you do have to, I won't say think, but sometimes you do have to consider the other options you have on the other side before just defaulting to spamming out a bunch of holy lines. All right, Repose. So this thing can be respectively higher. I've been jumping around with this card. Same thing with the like sort of enhance slash accelerate, flexibility slash downside. It doesn't end up being the 6 that it wants to be a lot of the time, but it is crazy good as a 6 drop. 4/7 ward evo. It denies a bunch of things. It has the freebie like restore at the end of the turn, which can sometimes be relevant. But just crazy above average stats on the evo on the turn 6 enhance is just ridiculously good. It's just if you can manage to weave out your curve to end up being okay for it, then take it and strictly treat it as a 6 drop, and you'll be very happy. And then you can like evo it as a 3/6 on like in a pinch, and you'll be very happy with taking this card. So Sanctum Keepers. So this card is low-key super important for Haven, because without it, like Haven, I won't say it's a joke, but Haven, if you think about it in like constructed, like when you're dealing with it, you're never afraid of like some crazy storm damage or combo to the face. Like if you're on like 7 or 8 life, similar to Take 2, like you in the past you would just like sort of laugh at Haven. I just like play a natural game, and then I'm perfectly fine. Like I'm not gonna die to like something random. And then barring like Taurus, which was in the pool technically. But yeah, this card's like super good. Over 2 turns, it does 8 points of damage. You can combo it with a Splendor. That's not why it's here, but that's a bonus thing you can do with it. But yeah, just over 2 turns, 8 damage. It trades super well. It's basically the same as a Luxhorn Sarissa without the damage reduction bubble. So that's already very good. Just trading with a bunch of stuff, dealing with just pressure on board, interaction at the silver slot that lives to tell the tale most of the time, and just damage over a couple turns or damage over 1 turn. Sometimes you can just chain them together and just have lethals from like 12 life that like normally like Haven wouldn't be able to do that without their lions or something. So just being able to just close out games that are going fair is like super good for Haven. So Scripture. Yeah, this is the sort of like the common base removal for it. It's a bit worse and a bit better than like standard removal. Like the banish doesn't really matter a lot of the cases nowadays, but sometimes niche stuff, last words, denying a shadow, whatever. But ping 2 or ping 3 is generally just better because you can just ping bigger stuff. But for the most part, you can just trade stuff in and banish anyway, so it sort of balances out. But yeah, Scripture's fine. Free banish applications, just free 2 play point, 3 pseudo damage removal, and you'll be very happy to take 1 or 2 of them, and sometimes even 3. So Moray, this card's a very skillful card. I love how just adding the countdown, adding the fanfare makes it like such a much better card than the original version, which was sort of like here maybe. But the fact that you can like skillfully use it to like deny turns, like you can deny evo turns, you can deny turns later. It just gives Haven a ton of safety in the mid to late game turns, where they can sort of just go around and just throw stuff around, 4 drops, 5 drops, and then they just have a safe turn 6 if they play it on like turn 3 or turn 4. And then it just gives you just a reward for just playing defensively, where it gives you another defensive turn, and then you can finally establish a threat or something. So yeah, just a bunch of cool applications you have with it, and it doesn't like punish you for playing it early on board. So I like it a lot. So Zealot, I originally had it not like here, but I was thinking about it. Oh, what if Haven doesn't want this? Like, does 3 of it clog out? But no, it just solves a lot of Haven's problems, where you just go on board, and then the opponents are snowballing you, and then they try to snowball you because they try to like dodge these removals. If you think about something like Swordcraft or like Forestcraft, where they just try to spread their board out, and then they make these hit like 2 to 1 play point followers, and then they're not as good. But this thing just like denies them, and it denies them in such a good way because it denies those followers. Like it destroys everything on their board that is really small, and then everything they play from now on has to be like accounted for. Like they have to deal with this, or they have to like play some really big stuff, which doesn't fall into their plans. And even though they play a bunch of big stuff, you can like Prism Strike or have like a bunch of stuff that reduces their health, and then you can kill like a 6 defense with just a Prism and this on board. And again, they can't afford to leave this up, so it acts as basically a pseudo heal, and it just stops the aggro, like, which is exactly what Haven wants. So you'll be happy to take your first one, and definitely the second one even. So Sanctuary, this ends up being like the 5 play point sort of tea time of the thing. It's funny because it evo's just as good, 7/6 is basically as high, as long as you don't have things to ping off, which you can definitely do a good job of just controlling board, keeping it down. And just having free like spawn on fanfare is super important, because it doesn't end up being a dead countdown draw in the late game. Like 2 5/4 untargetables are super valuable. Just having the 1 off 5 play points is like already vanilla enough, and you'll be happy to take it as just your premium 5 drop to take over your other 5 drops. Just dropping it down, just forgetting about it. 3 turns later, you get free value from it. Good in the mid game and good in the late game, so it ends up being very solid there. So a couple changes to the neutrals. Armored Troll, again, you're playing a defensive draft. For the most part, you're not going to be super aggressive on board. You can get the Feather Rush combo, like I said, but you have better cards that you can take that sort of simulate that, and this card doesn't trade at all, so you're going to be in a bad trouble if you have to play this and you're being pressured out. So Lyria, same thing, random neutral combos. You actually might like take it higher if you get like some random combos from it. You can still combo with this, but it just stays on board very badly. If this ends up being your 2-drop in the early game, it's not going to be as good. So Investigation Font, I'll cover these together like usual. Just again, card draw, like maybe you can afford it sometimes when you need it, but you do have some tools that sort of draw you cards that are cheaper. And these ones can be slow. They can sort of lose you the game if you play them in the mid-game turns. So again, Genesis is a legend. It's sort of, I won't say bad in Haven, but because it ends up being like okay in basically every craft. But there are definitely some drafts that don't want it. Like a lot of drafts end up not wanting it, just even though it ends up being decent in it, just because it can be a dead draw at times. But yeah, you can leverage it, you can make it better. So it's reasonable. So yeah, Steadfast, 1 play point ward, perfectly fine, free enhanced value. All those are just a neat package you can take. Same thing, Tarman, Order, you can do some cool things with them, but, just vanilla statted plus random upside, downside. You'll be reasonably happy to take it. You might actually take Barkeep higher because you might want a 3-drop. I think you'll definitely take Chaos higher, thinking about it more, just because of the distribution of play points. The Banish Golem, or Banish Guy, just, again, 6-drop, you'll take them when you want them. Try not to get screwed over by the Amulet Banish, and you'll be perfectly content with just having a random 6-drop in your deck. Fount, just sort of not, I won't say not as good, Haven as itself is sort of a defensive craft, look at, like, Riposte. But you might not have a lot of things to trade, the draw is technically delayed, but, you can definitely make it work. It's definitely a reasonable card regardless. So yeah, Paradise, again, just upside on a 2-drop. You'll be happy to just take him up as a vanilla too. That ends up serving his role pretty well and just randomly banishing like a fairy or like a random like X1 randomly sometimes. And it ends up being okay. Seraphic, you have removal sort of competing with a slot, but again, same thing. The two play point application sometimes happens, and hand 6 is reasonable, and it's just vanilla plus that you can take as hard removal if you need it. Chaos, yep, up and down. I think it can actually respectfully go up if you definitely need your 2-drops to sort of curve out. Like this is sort of like or not 2-drop, 3-drops. This is sort of a 3-drop, but this ends up like being, I won't say not as good in Haven, but you can definitely, pop it on like a Barong or something that's very strong. But just on random stuff, you might not have stuff to buff. You might be playing like defensively from hand, so this might not have a lot of good targets, especially in like the mid game where this, I won't say shines the most, but where you want to get this off, because the opponent's like removing your stuff and trying to like snowball. Like they're trying their best to snowball you, so you might end up not having anything on board. So Goblin Fighter, again, just standard good stuff. Goblin's not as good in this craft because you're not being aggressive and you're not trying to tempo people out with like a bunch of followers on board. But Goblin Leader is nice, the 50% chance to get it, just a free sack on turn 4, which is super important. So just, a potential for a freebie, you can sometimes make the Goblin work. So, just card draw on a body is nice. Same thing, these 2 sack, they're definitely not as good in Haven. Just because of the same thing, you're not playing like super aggressively. This one's actually more fine because it's still like value on the draw, but the Keen's not that strong in Haven, but it's still like above average, gives you a draw, and you can like definitely use it sort of in the late game or something. This card is better in Haven because you're playing defensively from hand. This card ends up getting the Fanfare Rush, and you can get the free Evo if you definitely have it on the Evo turns and can make use of it. Same thing Kaiza, he can respectfully go up. It's like reasonable just having him as a 3-drop and then evoing him, just getting the draw, but most of the time you just have the removal, save it in hand for some safety. So same thing Craving, he'll never go up, but he'll never go down just because, you know, stuff's in the format that punishes it, but, you know, just solid, just removal on a body that gives you a bunch of nice stuff. Applications, and you can like storm with like something random on board as well, like the Barong or this that sticks. Yep, Catalina, it's, I won't say not as good as Haven, like, you know, turn 6, turn 7, sometimes if it's neutral board, it's super strong as a play. But when you're playing sort of defensively, when you actually have to evo this on 6, it's definitely not the most unfair thing you could be doing in the craft. So it can sort of like fall down, but it's still like a reasonable like one of to take. Reyna, like, she's big, so she's good enough, and then you can do some like cool things with amulets that pop out. That's the main reason she's staying up. Otherwise, she's not that good in Haven, just off like the stuff you get. But like, you know, you can still make her work with some random stuff. Lowain, same thing, just a bunch of value. You know, draw a bunch of cards. Interaction in hand, super important. So 1/3 rush, 2/1 storm. You can use all those to trade. And the final like 9-drop is still super good in Haven. Just gives you a random heal when you need it. Well, not when you need it. It's random. But, you know, just heal, chip, free damage, AoE aura for the team sometimes helps. So, yeah, Splendor's higher because you definitely need interactions. One of the ways you beat Haven or Haven loses is just running out of things to do from hand. Like, you can definitely reliably gauge how much removal they have in their draft. It's mainly just sort of in here. So, just Splendor just adds another just element to having just more removal. And again, super niche stuff like getting lethals off it, but nothing to reliably bank on. So yeah, your standard 4-drops, you'll definitely appreciate having them. Especially, even though you have, like, you know, sacks, you want to have just random stuff you can evo on 4. Like, you have to draft it sort of as a premium. You actually don't have too many options on, like, turn 4 in, like, your bronze and silver picks. So just having good evo 4-drops is definitely something you'll want in Haven. So same thing, removal, like, they'll compete for the same slot, but they're limited slots regardless, so you definitely want some hard removal to deal with problematic big threats instantly. So yep, the whatever is not too important, the damage in Haven's case, but sometimes you can have some aggressive or just template drafts that sort of just kill people off damage. Alright, so a bit early on this one, so maybe I like didn't go over stuff as well. Maybe you can like argue with me in the comments over like why this card's like better or the best card in Haven. But I guess that's it, and I'll see you guys from the next